Pirates and piracy, truly a romanticized part of history. Most people enjoy a good story about pirates. Many have probably heard stories such as The Black Corsair, Treasure Island, Pirates of the Caribbean. But fiction aside, the history of piracy is filled with impressive deeds of people who took it upon themselves to rebel and have a certain control over the seas. The fearsome Blackbeard, Captain Kidd, Barbarossa are only a few names that went down in history. The word pirate comes from the Greek peirates, later used in medieval Latin as pirata, and in time it became synonymous with a person who robs at sea with the use of violence. Words such as corsair, buccaneer, and plunderer are also used to describe pirates. The most famous examples of pirates range from the 17th to 18th century in what is dubbed as the Golden Age of piracy, but they have existed long before that, probably since commerce at sea became popular. The earliest historical accounts of such endeavors were from ancient Sumer, present-day Iraq, around 3000 BC, where pirates traveled along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers to attack the Sumerians. Another account of ancient piracy was in the 14th century BC, regarding the Sea People, a naval confederacy that attacked cities and ships around the Aegean Sea, and which most likely contributed the most to the Bronze Age collapse. Historians still don't know for certain where these plundering sailors came from. What it is known is their strength, as ancient Egyptian sources describe they came from the sea in their warships, and none could stand against them. Historians and pop culture have different opinions regarding pirates. They were depicted as rebels against the ruler, against oppressive governments, against gender norms, social status, and customs. There were pirates who used to wear clothing that was not suitable for them based on their social status. More specifically, wearing clothing that nobility would otherwise wear, sometimes ignoring even gender by having women in their crews or even as captains. The historical truth remains that piracy, as well as many other non-stereotypical female activities, were predominantly male, and a very small amount of them were actually women. There was a ship's contract, a pirate code, if you will, which represented the codes they were supposed to abide by. Pirate captains made their own rules, and sometimes those rules stipulated that women were prohibited from joining the crew. Why would women be prohibited? Some said they would bring bad luck. Some said this would only incite violence amongst the crew. In Bartholomew Roberts' pirate code, it is stated that if a man convinced a woman to disguise herself as a man and join the crew, that man would be killed. Blackbeard also didn't want any women on board of his ship, and it is said that if he saw one, he would strangle her and throw her overboard. Back in the 17th century, Welsh judge, academic, and diplomat Sir Leoline Jenkins described pirates as hostis humani generis, or enemies of the human race. In longer words, he described them as not simply enemies of one nation or the other, but as a problem that everybody faced or could face if they got too close to them or were in their scope. As such, they did not belong to anybody, had no protection but their own, and any privateers, any ship of any nation, had the right to subdue them. Given the state of the world in the 17th and 18th century and the expansion of the colonial empires, sea trade was flourishing and much needed. Thus, plenty of opportunities for pirates to strike and loot gold and other riches arose, causing the Caribbean to be filled with pirates from many countries, transforming this era into the golden age of piracy. Hubert Deschamps described pirates as a unique race, born of sea and of brutal dream, of free people, detached from other societies and from the future, without children and without old people, without homes, without hope, but not without audacity. A people for whom atrocity was a career of choice and death the certitude of the day after tomorrow. A somber description, but just as plausible considering their way of life. There are many reasons as to why someone would choose to become a pirate. Some wanted to earn money in a world where you had to be an apprentice for years before you could actually earn properly. Farmers were forced to leave due to greedy landowners. Young boys wanted to travel by ship and earn their fair share at the same time, but honorable careers, such as in the Navy, required discipline. As such, piracy seemed a much more attractive alternative, and they were quite hooked on it. Accounts of pirate captains and other pirates were written by Captain Johnson, whose real identity was most likely Daniel Defoe, in his famous A General History of the Robberies and Murders of the Most Notorious Pirates. This is a well-made collection of pirate biographies, complete with illustrations, and is probably one of the most important sources of historiography in regards to piracy in the Caribbean. Using a disguise was a useful way of changing one's life in some way, and since women were not often allowed to join pirate ships, many of them disguised themselves as men and served on those ships, an action described even in ballads. Now, who was Anne Bonny? Anne was born in Ireland on the 8th of March 1697 in a town close to Cork from an affair her distinguished lawyer father, William Cormac, had with one of his servants, Mary Brennan. He then hid Anne by dressing her up in male clothing, giving her a new identity as a relative's son in order to fool his wife. However, that failed, so he left Ireland and sailed to South Carolina along with Anne and his mistress. Now here's the doozy. It's not so unheard of for someone to have an affair, but the story of how William's wife found out about the affair sure is quite interesting, to say the least. The story is that the lawyer's lover-maid had another suitor, a tanner, which was a person who was employed to tan animal hides, who engaged in the occasional repossessing of valuables. In short, he stole 3 silver spoons and put them into his pocket. The maid saw the disappearance of the spoons and knew who took them, and confronted him, then threatened to go to the justice of the peace, a judicial officer elected or appointed to keep the peace. The tanner then hid the spoons under Mary's bed, assuming she would find them there, but she didn't. The lawyer's wife came home and learned about the theft from Mary, after which the tanner admitted to stealing and returning them, but under the maid's bed. She then decided to check if that was true, found them there, and for whatever reason, she decided that she would sleep the night in the maid's chamber and the maid in some other place. After a while, laying in the maid's bed at night, she heard someone entering the room and realized it was her husband after hearing him ask if Mary was awake. She pretended to be asleep and he proceeded to have his way with her. She thought that thinking she was someone else was more than a little mortifying, but she lay still and bore it like a Christian. After all this was done, she went to a constable and accused Mary of stealing the spoons. The maid was then arrested and put in prison, which caused William to have a fit of rage. Coincidentally enough, both maid and wife got pregnant, and he didn't have any idea he actually had relations with his wife. Even though she left him, he was in need of money, so his wife kept giving him money until she found out he was raising his illegitimate child. After this, he decided to sell his business and leave the country. Anne's childhood is said to have been difficult. Her mother passed away when she was 12. She apparently attacked the girl for reasons unknown and injured the man who tried to sexually assault her. Like it was customary at that time, her father wanted to arrange her marriage, but she did not agree with that, and as such, she ran away at 16 and married a young man named James Bonny. Her father disowned her, and she sailed with James to Nassau, where pirates usually frequented, a place dubbed as a sanctuary for buccaneers. This place was located on the New Providence Island in the Bahamas, and it was also known as the Republic of Pirates. Here, she met a pirate who went by the name of Calico Jack Rackham. Anne fell in love with him and left James in order to run off with Jack on his pirate ship as a new member of the crew, but of course, disguised as a boy. The crew wasn't ignorant about her actual gender, and she would take no disrespect from them, so when one crewmate showed his disapproval of her presence there, it is said that she stabbed him in the heart. There's a bunch of different accounts as to how Anne met Mary Read. One of them is that Calico Jack's pirates captured the ship Mary was aboard of. Since she too was dressed as a young man, she was taken prisoner. It is said that Anne later tried to seduce Mary while she was dressed in female clothing, but Mary confessed she too was a woman, showing Anne her chest. According to artwork depicting Anne, showing her bare chest was something she did to men she defeated in a duel, only to make them realize they were defeated by a woman. That era was interested in the sensational, so naturally, they were fascinated by stories about how a woman who chose the life of piracy was terrorizing the Caribbean alongside her male lover and female lover, which of course was thought to have been Mary. Truth or not, nevertheless, their relationship grew. Mary joined the crew, but in time, Calico Jack became jealous, and as such, he tried to kill the new recruit. In order to stop him, Mary showed him her chest, after which Rackham gave up on his plan. Anne and Mary both became well known in the Caribbean, and both had bounties on their heads. However, in October 1720, Calico Jack's ship struck gold, and after celebrating until dawn, they were attacked by the English Marines sent to capture pirates. They were drinking like there was no tomorrow. Time flies when you're having rum. They were very spirited. Captain Jonathan Barnett ordered them to surrender, and after a while, due to the crew's state of intoxication, Rackham and his men agreed, but Anne and Mary refused, fighting the English alone. They lost against the English privateers, and the entire crew was captured. They were taken to Port Royal in Jamaica, where they were tried and sentenced to be hanged. However, Anne and Mary were pregnant at that time, and they both leaded their bellies, and their sentence was delayed until they gave birth. Before Rackham's execution, at his request, Anne visited him in his cell and told him the now famous, "I'm sorry to see you here, but if you fought like a man, you wouldn't be about to die like a dog." Anne and Mary were both accused of seizing 7 fishing boats and 4 merchant ships that together were worth over £1,000, roughly £150,000 today. During their trial, a witness who was aboard of Calico Jack's ship declared about both Anne and Mary that the 2 women, prisoners at the bar, were then on board of the said sloop and wore men's jackets and long trousers and handkerchiefs tied about their heads, and that each of them had a machete and a pistol in their hands. Another 2 witnesses declared that they were active on board and willing to do anything, that Anne Bonny, one of the prisoners at the bar, handed gunpowder to the men, and when they saw any vessel, gave chase, or attacked, they wore men's clothes, and at other times they wore women's clothes, that they did not seem to be kept or detained by force, but of their own free will consent. Mary Read died due to complications of her pregnancy, but there was much speculation as to Anne's fate. What's clear is that Anne Bonny was released. Her father probably paid her bounty, or his business partners pulled off some strings and had her released. Nobody knows for sure what happened to her afterwards. It was written in A General History of Robberies and Murders of the Most Notorious Pirates that she was continued in prison to the time of her lying in and afterwards reprieved from time to time, but what is become of her since we cannot tell. Only this we know, that she was not executed. One theory regarding her fate is that she remarried, moved to Virginia, and died in her 80s in 1782, whereas another possibility is that she died in 1732 in Jamaica, as it was stated in a ledger that an Anne Bonny was buried at a certain parish there. The Trials of John Rackham and Other Pirates, a pamphlet from 1720, provides an official account of the trials of Rackham's pirates, including Anne Bonny and Mary Read. They were all considered fierce, genuine pirates in every sense. What exactly attracted Anne to a life of piracy? There are stories that when she was younger, she heard the fearsome Blackbeard laughing in a tavern and was impressed by how he looked and how imposing he was. Or maybe she was drawn to a life of piracy by the tales of the Irish pirate queen Grace O'Malley, who made a name for herself in late 16th century. Either way, Anne Bonny stays in history and pop culture as one of the most famous pirates. One who had a bounty on her head was taken to a trial, which by itself became famous and provided a source of inspiration for numerous ballads, stories, movies, and games for people to both enjoy and marvel at the prowess of some people who chose to rebel, to become outlaws, and discard the social norms that were expected from them by society and by their peers.